In downtown Portland, a methodical financial analyst was about to receive the call that would shatter her carefully constructed world. What started as a routine Tuesday morning at her consulting firm took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a foreclosure notice bearing her name on a house she'd never seen. Chen wasn't your typical victim of identity theft. For 15 years, she had spent her life rebuilding from the financial wreckage of her father's gambling addiction, known for her obsessive attention to credit scores and risk management. When she encountered her own stolen dreams living and breathing in someone else's life, she had no idea she was walking into a family reckoning 3 years in the making. Maya's investigation would lead to the devastating discovery that the thief wasn't a stranger, but the sister she'd refused to help, now pregnant and engaged under Maya's own name. What began as simple fraud would become a complex web of stolen identity, authentic love, and the impossible choice between justice and healing. The Portland community would never be the same after Maya decided whether to destroy the beautiful life her sister had built with her stolen foundation, or find a way to transform betrayal into redemption. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chen's Tuesday morning began with the precision of a Swiss watch, exactly as she'd designed it. Coffee brewed at 6:47 a.m. News briefing while reviewing quarterly projections. 30-minute drive to her downtown Portland office, arriving precisely at 8:15 to beat the traffic surge. Her desk at Meridian Financial Consulting occupied the corner of the 15th floor, overlooking the Willamette River, where she'd spent the last 6 years rebuilding something her father had destroyed. Financial security. The certified mail envelope waited on her desk like a small bomb. Maya's assistant, Karen, hovered near the doorway. It came about an hour ago. Looked important. Her voice carried that particular tone people used when delivering potentially bad news. Maya examined the return address. First National Bank, Legal Department. The weight of the envelope felt wrong. Too substantial for routine correspondence. Too official for marketing. She opened it with the same methodical care she applied to everything else in her life. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. Property address, 2847, Elm Street, Portland, or 97215. Borrower, Maya Chen. Loan number, FNB 4479832. The words swam before her eyes. 3 months delinquent. $320,000 principal balance. Foreclosure sale scheduled in 30 days. Karen, Maya's voice came out steadier than she felt. Can you close my door? The numbers didn't make sense. Maya had never borrowed against any property. She'd been saving for a house, her dream house, for 5 years, accumulating every dollar with the obsessive precision of someone who'd watched their childhood home disappear beneath a mountain of their father's gambling debts. Never again, she'd promised herself. Never again would she be vulnerable to someone else's financial chaos. But here was proof that someone had taken out a mortgage in her name. Maya's hands shook as she dialed First National Bank. The automated system transferred her 3 times before connecting her to Tom Bradley in the loan department. This is Tom Bradley. How can I help you? I'm calling about loan number FNB 4479832. I've received a foreclosure notice for a property I never purchased. A pause. Keyboard clicking. Ma'am, I show that loan was originated 18 months ago. You put down $64,000 and financed the remainder. The property is a single-family home on Elm Street. That's impossible. I have your application right here, signed and notarized. Employment verification from Meridian Financial Consulting. Credit score of 812. Everything was properly documented. Maya's credit score was 812. She checked it obsessively, the way other people checked their weight or blood pressure. But she'd never applied for a mortgage. Could you read me the social security number on the application? Tom rattled off 9 digits. Her digits. The room tilted slightly. Maya gripped her desk, her knuckles white against the dark wood. I need to see this paperwork. All of it. After hanging up, Maya pulled her credit report. Something she did, monthly, a ritual born from childhood trauma. But this time, scanning the familiar landscape of her financial life, she found foreign territories. Credit cards she'd never opened. A personal loan from a credit union she'd never visited. An auto loan for a car she didn't own. Someone had been living an entire financial life using her identity. Maya's afternoon meetings blurred past in a haze of half-attention and growing panic. By 4 p.m., she couldn't concentrate on anything except the address burning in her mind. 2847 Elm Street. She needed to see this house, this property that somehow belonged to her on paper but not in reality. The drive to Elm Street took her through neighborhoods she'd explored during her own house-hunting fantasies. Tree-lined streets in the Laurelhurst area, where craftsman homes sat behind manicured gardens and white picket fences, the kind of neighborhood she'd bookmarked on real estate websites, the kind of life she'd been methodically saving toward. 2847. Elm Street was a blue Craftsman with white trim and a wraparound porch. Garden boxes overflowed with late summer flowers. A hammock hung between two oak trees in the front yard. It was beautiful. Perfect, actually. It was also exactly the house from her Pinterest board. Maya sat in her car, engine running, staring at the property. She'd found this house online 2 years ago and saved the photos to a private Pinterest board titled, Someday. She'd studied every detail, the original hardwood floors visible through the front windows, the built-in bookshelves, the kitchen with its subway tile backsplash. She'd calculated mortgage payments, imagined furniture arrangements, dreamed about hosting family dinners in the formal dining room. Someone had stolen her dream and made it real. A silver Honda Civic sat in the driveway. Maya's breath caught. She drove a silver Honda Civic. Same model. Same year. Even the same small dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident 3 years ago. Movement in the kitchen window drew her attention. A woman moved through the space Maya had mentally inhabited countless times, reaching into cabinets Maya had never touched. The woman had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a blue sweater. From this distance in profile, she could almost be. The woman turned toward the window. Maya's world stopped. The face looking back at her was her own face. Same angular cheekbones, same straight nose, same dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses identical to the ones Maya wore. The resemblance was so perfect it took Maya several seconds to process what she was seeing. A man appeared behind the woman. Tall, sandy-haired, wearing a button-down shirt. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her neck. The woman, Maya's double, leaned back against him, laughing at something he'd whispered. They moved, together with the easy intimacy of a couple who knew each other's rhythms, who'd shared hundreds of quiet moments like this one. Maya's phone rang, startling her back to the present. She glanced at the caller ID, Karen from the office. But when she looked back at the window, the couple had disappeared. Her hands trembled as she put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. 3 blocks away, she parked again and tried to process what she'd just witnessed. Someone hadn't just stolen her identity, they'd stolen her life. Her dream house, her car, even her face. The implications cascaded through her mind like dominoes, falling. How long had this been going on? Who was the man? How had someone managed to not only steal her financial information, but also create such a complete replica of her existence? Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her father. Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope you're well. She stared at the message, remembering their last conversation 6 months ago when he'd asked for money. Again. She'd refused. Again. Had been refusing for 3 years, ever since she'd finally stopped enabling his gambling addiction and started protecting herself. But what if someone else hadn't refused? What if someone else had been more generous with Maya's good credit and careful savings? The thought hit her like cold water. Maya scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she hadn't called in 3 years. Her finger hovered over Elena's name, her younger sister who'd disappeared from Maya's life after their last bitter argument about money and responsibility, and the different ways they'd chosen to deal with their father's destruction. Elena, who'd always been told she looked exactly like Maya. Elena, who knew all of Maya's passwords because they'd grown up sharing everything. Elena, who'd seen Maya's Pinterest boards and retirement planning spreadsheets and secret dreams about stability and normal life. Maya's vision blurred as the pieces clicked into place. The woman in the window hadn't just looked like Maya. She'd moved like Maya, dressed like Maya, lived in Maya's dream house with Maya's dream life. Because she was Maya's sister. The sister who'd vanished 3 years ago after Maya had refused to loan her money for rehab. The sister who'd always struggled with depression and addiction and feeling like the family failure. The sister who'd apparently decided that if she couldn't fix her own life, she'd simply steal Maya's instead. Maya sat in her car as the Portland evening traffic hummed around her, realizing that everything she'd built, her credit, her savings, her carefully constructed security, had been weaponized against her by the one person she'd trusted most, the sister she'd protected from their father's chaos. The sister she'd loved enough to say no to, hoping it would finally force Elena to get help. Instead, Elena had helped herself. To Maya's entire existence. Maya's hands remained frozen on the steering wheel as the reality settled deeper into her bones. Elena. Her baby sister, who'd cried herself to sleep in Maya's bed after their mother left, who'd made Maya promise they'd always take care of each other, who'd apparently decided that promise meant she could take everything Maya had worked for. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across Elm Street. Maya pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, typing Maya Chen Portland into the search bar. Her fingers felt clumsy, disconnected from her body, as if she were watching someone else perform these actions. The first result made her stomach drop. A Maya Chen PDX. The profile photo showed Elena's face, Maya's face, smiling in front of a coffee shop Maya recognized from the Pearl District. The bio read, financial analyst, coffee addict, lucky in love, Portland OR. Maya scrolled through the posts with growing horror. 2 years of Elena's life, documented under Maya's name. Photos of Elena and the sandy-haired man hiking in Forest Park. Elena laughing over dinner at Maya's favorite restaurant. Elena wearing Maya's engagement ring, the vintage Art Deco setting. Maya had shown her sister years ago when they'd still talked about their dreams. Each image felt like a violation, but worse was how natural Elena looked. How happy. How effortlessly she seemed to inhabit the life Maya had been too careful, too guarded to pursue. Elena had comments from friends Maya didn't recognize, co-workers, from jobs Maya had never held. A whole social network built on stolen foundations. The most recent post was from 3 days ago. Elena in the kitchen of the Elm Street house, her hand resting on a barely visible bump beneath her sweater. The caption read, "When you find out you're going to be a family of 3, can't wait to share this journey with you all." Maya's phone slipped from her hands, clattering against the passenger seat. Elena was pregnant. Not only had she stolen Maya's identity, she'd built a family with it. The man in the photos, David, according to the tagged posts, believed he was engaged to Maya Chen, financial analyst, the woman carrying his child. A memory surfaced unbidden. Elena, at 16, coming to Maya's room after their father had gambled away their college funds. "What if I could just be you for a while?" she'd whispered. "You're so good at everything. You never mess up like I do." Maya had held her sister then, promising that things would get better, that Elena would find her own path. She'd never imagined Elena would decide that path led directly through Maya's life. The Elm Street house glowed with warm light now. Maya could see figures moving behind the sheer curtains. Elena and David settling in for another evening of their stolen domestic bliss. Maya started her car and drove slowly past the house, trying to understand how her sister had managed such a complete transformation. Elena had always been the artistic one, the dreamer who'd started college as an art major before dropping out when their mother left. She'd bounced between jobs and relationships, always seeming to find new ways to disappoint their father, even as he spiraled deeper into his gambling addiction. Maya had been the responsible one, the one who'd gotten a business degree and a steady job, who'd managed to rebuild her credit after their father's debts had destroyed their family's financial stability. But looking at these photos, Elena seemed to have become the version of Maya that Maya herself had never allowed herself to be. Spontaneous, social, open to love and risk, and the kind of happiness that required vulnerability. Maya parked 3 blocks away and walked back toward the house, staying in the shadows of the oak trees that lined the street. She felt like a stalker, spying on her own life from the outside. Through the front window, she could see Elena and David in the living room. Elena was curled against David's side on a cream-colored sofa that Maya recognized from her own Pinterest board. They were watching something on television, David's hand resting protectively on Elena's stomach. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly domestic, that Maya felt a stab of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Elena looked genuinely content in a way Maya had never seen before. Even during their childhood, before everything fell apart, Elena had carried a restless sadness, but in this stolen life, she seemed to have found peace. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from her father. Elena called. Says she's pregnant. You didn't tell me you two were talking again. The blood drained from Maya's face. Elena had been in contact with their father, using Maya's identity. What else had she told him? What other parts of Maya's life had she infiltrated? Maya quickly typed back. When did she call? What did she say? Last week. Said she was engaged to a wonderful man named David. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You've built such a beautiful life. Maya stared at the message, her father's pride burning like acid in her chest. He was proud of Elena's life, built on Maya's foundation. Proud of the daughter who'd learned to be successful by becoming someone else entirely. Another text followed. She invited me to the wedding, said it's in the spring. I'd love to walk you down the aisle if you'll have me. The wedding. Elena was planning to marry David under Maya's name, with Maya's credit in Maya's dream house. She was creating a future that should have belonged to Maya, complete with Maya's father walking her down the aisle. Maya's legs felt unsteady. She sat down on the sidewalk, her back against the rough bark of an oak tree, and tried to remember how to breathe. The scope of Elena's deception was staggering. This wasn't just identity theft, it was identity replacement. Elena hadn't just borrowed Maya's credit. She'd become Maya in every way that mattered. Through the window, Maya watched Elena stand up from the sofa, stretching with the careful movements of early pregnancy. David immediately moved to support her, his hands gentle on her waist. The tenderness between them was real. Whatever else was false about their relationship. David loved who he thought was Maya Chen, and Elena, playing Maya, had apparently learned how to accept that love in ways the real Maya never had. Maya thought about her own dating history, a series of carefully managed relationships that had never quite developed into anything lasting. She'd always found reasons to maintain distance, to protect herself from the kind of financial and emotional chaos she'd witnessed in her childhood. Elena, it seemed, had used Maya's credentials to build the very life Maya had been too afraid to pursue. The irony was devastating. Maya had spent years building perfect credit and careful savings to ensure she'd never be vulnerable again. Elena had used those very protections to create vulnerability. A marriage, a pregnancy, a community of people who would be hurt when the truth came out. Maya's phone rang. Detective Sarah Kim, according to the caller ID, returning the voicemail Maya had left earlier from the bank parking lot. Ms. Chen, this is Detective Kim from Portland Police Financial Crimes. You reported possible identity theft? Yes. Maya's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. I need to report my sister. The words hung in the evening air. Saying them out loud made the situation real in a way that seeing Elena through the window hadn't quite managed. Maya was about to destroy her sister's life the same way Elena had destroyed hers. Can you come in tomorrow morning? We'll need detailed documentation, and this type of case requires extensive investigation. Tomorrow morning, Maya watched Elena disappear into the kitchen, probably making dinner for David with groceries bought using Maya's stolen credit cards. Yes, I'll be there. After hanging up, Maya remained sitting under the oak tree as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Lights came on in windows up and down Elm Street. Families settling in for another ordinary evening. Only there was nothing ordinary about the life being lived in Maya's stolen house. She thought about the Instagram posts, the happiness in Elena's face, the protective way David touched her growing belly. She thought about her father's pride and the spring wedding invitation that would never come. She thought about the art supplies she'd glimpsed in one of Elena's photos. Her sister had apparently started painting again, something she'd given up after their mother left. Elena had built a life using Maya's identity, but in some ways, she'd become more Maya than Maya had ever allowed herself to be. She'd taken Maya's careful financial planning and used it to create the home and family that Maya had only dreamed about. She'd taken Maya's good credit and steady employment history and leveraged them into love and community and the kind of risks that led to genuine happiness. Maya stood slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans. Tomorrow she would file a police report that would begin unraveling Elena's carefully constructed new existence. She would reclaim her identity and her credit and her dreams. But tonight, she stood in the shadows outside her own stolen life, watching her sister live out every future. Maya had been too afraid to pursue. The last thing Maya saw before walking back to her car was Elena and David in the kitchen. Elena's hands covering David's as they both rested on her stomach. They were talking quietly, probably about names or nursery colors or all the mundane, beautiful details of building a life together. A life that belonged to Maya on paper but had never really been hers at all, because Maya had been too careful to take the risks required for that kind of happiness, and Elena had been desperate enough to steal them instead. Maya barely slept that night, staring at the ceiling of her minimalist apartment, while images of Elena's stolen life cycled through her mind. By 6 a.m., she was dressed and driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward David's architecture firm, the address she'd found through Elena's tagged Instagram posts. She told herself she needed to understand the scope of Elena's deception, to gather evidence for Detective Kim. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She needed to see the man who loved the version of herself that she'd never allowed to exist. Morrison and Associates occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in the Alberta Arts District. Maya parked across the street at 7:15 a.m. and waited, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She felt like a private investigator in a movie, except she was investigating her own stolen life. David emerged from the building's side entrance at 7:43 a.m., exactly when Elena's Instagram posts suggested he took his morning coffee break. He was taller than he'd appeared through the kitchen window, with the kind of lean build that suggested he spent time outdoors. His sandy hair was slightly disheveled, and he wore a navy wool sweater over dark jeans, casual but thoughtful, like someone who cared about appearance without being vain about it. Maya followed him 3 blocks to Stumptown. Coffee, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection while staying close enough to observe. David moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, stopping to pet a dog tied outside a bookstore, holding the door for an elderly woman carrying too many packages. These small gestures revealed a fundamental kindness that made Maya's chest tighten with something between admiration and grief. Inside the coffee shop, Maya chose a table near the back while David ordered at the counter. She pulled out her laptop and opened a spreadsheet, trying to look like any other professional stealing a few minutes for caffeine before the workday began. But her attention was entirely focused on the man who believed he was engaged to Maya, Chen. "Large cortado for David," the barista called out. David collected his coffee and surveyed the crowded cafe. Maya's heart hammered as his gaze swept past her table, but he showed no recognition. Why would he? He'd never seen the real Maya, Chen, before. Maya waited until David was seated at a corner table before approaching the counter. "Medium cortado, please," she told the barista, her voice carefully modulated to carry just far enough. "Great choice," David said from his table, looking up from his phone with a friendly smile. "Best cortado in the city." Maya turned toward him, letting him see her face fully for the first time. "I'll have to take your word for it. I'm usually more of a basic coffee person." David's expression didn't change, which meant Elena had been right about one thing. Their resemblance was so complete that even the man who kissed Elena goodnight wouldn't notice subtle differences in mannerisms or speech patterns. Maya felt a chill run down her spine at how thoroughly Elena had studied and replicated her. "Mind if I sit?" Maya gestured to the empty chair across from David. "I'm waiting for a meeting, and it looks like we're both early birds." "Please." David closed his phone and extended his hand. "David Morrison." Maya. The name felt strange in her mouth, like trying on clothes that fit perfectly but had never belonged to her. Maya Chen. If David found it odd that she'd introduced herself with her full name, he didn't show it. Instead, his face lit up with the kind of genuine warmth Maya had rarely experienced from strangers. "Maya Chen. That's interesting. I know someone with that exact name. Beautiful woman. Works in finance. Actually." He paused, studying Maya's face more carefully. You know, you look remarkably like her. Are you related? Sister, maybe? Maya's coffee arrived, buying her a moment to steady her voice. Portland's not that big a city. Coincidences happen. She sat down across from him, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The small scar above his left eyebrow. The simple gold watch that suggested practicality over ostentation. What kind of work do you do, David? Architecture, sustainable, design mostly. His enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. I specialize in retrofitting older buildings for energy efficiency, while preserving their historical character. It's like solving puzzles. How do you honor what came before while building something better for the future? Maya found herself leaning forward, drawn in by his passion. That sounds challenging. Balancing preservation with innovation. Exactly. Take the building where my office is, 1920s warehouse that we converted into mixed-use space. We kept the original brick and timber structure but added solar panels, improved insulation, modern HVAC systems that work with the building's natural airflow rather than against it. David's hands moved as he talked, sketching invisible structures, in the air between them. The Maya I know, the other Maya, she understands that kind of thing. The value of building on strong foundations while still allowing for growth. Maya's throat tightened. She sounds like someone who thinks long-term. She does. She's incredibly thoughtful about the future, about building something lasting. David's voice carried the warmth of deep affection. We're actually planning our wedding for this spring. I proposed 6 months ago, and she said yes before I'd even finished asking. He laughed, the sound full of joy and memory. She was so surprised. I think she'd convinced herself she wasn't the type of person who got fairy tale endings. Maya stared at her coffee, afraid David would see the pain in her eyes. Elena had apparently shared Maya's deepest insecurities, her fears about deserving happiness, and David had loved her for them. Or thought he had. That's wonderful, Maya managed. She's lucky to have found someone who sees her that way. I'm the lucky one. David pulled out his phone and showed Maya a photo. Elena in a white sundress, laughing as she held up her left hand to display the engagement ring. Maya's engagement ring, the one she'd bookmarked on jewelry websites and dreamed about for years. This was right after I proposed. We'd gone hiking in the gorge, and I had this whole elaborate plan involving a sunset and champagne. But she looked so beautiful just standing there in the morning light that I couldn't wait. Maya studied the photo, seeing herself in Elena's face but recognizing none of herself in Elena's expression. Elena looked radiant, unguarded, completely present in the moment. Maya had never looked like that, not even in her happiest memories. She seems very, Maya searched for the right word, open, comfortable with herself. She wasn't always. When we first met, she was incredibly guarded. I think she'd been hurt before, had some family trauma that made it hard for her to trust. David's voice grew softer, more protective. She's been working with a therapist, dealing with childhood stuff. It's been amazing to watch her blossom. Maya's breath caught. Elena had been in therapy under Maya's insurance, discussing their childhood trauma, using Maya's benefits to work through the very experiences that had shaped both of their lives. The violation felt personal in a way that stolen credit cards somehow didn't. What kind of family trauma? Maya asked, hating herself for prying but needing to understand how much of their shared past Elena had exposed. David hesitated, clearly, weighing loyalty against his natural openness. I probably shouldn't go into details. That's her story to tell. But her father had gambling problems that really damaged the family. Her mother left when she was young. She and her sister became estranged over money issues. He shook his head. Maya blames herself for a lot of it, thinks she should have been able to fix things somehow. That's why therapy has been so important. Helping her understand that she wasn't responsible for other people's choices. Maya felt like she was drowning. Elena had taken not just Maya's identity but her trauma, her guilt, her most private emotional struggles, and shared them with this kind, genuine man who now looked at Maya with sympathy for wounds he thought belonged to her sister. She's fortunate to have your support through all that, Maya said quietly. We support each other. That's what partnerships are about, right? Building something together that's stronger than what either person could create alone. David glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, I should probably head back. We're presenting a proposal today for a community housing project. Affordable units built into a historic brewery. Maya's been helping me crunch the numbers, make sure the financing works. She has this incredible mind for details, sees patterns that other people miss. Maya almost smiled despite her pain. Elena had always been terrible with money, but apparently, she'd learned to leverage Maya's reputation for financial acuity without having to develop the skills herself. David stood, extending his hand again. It was really nice meeting you, Maya. I hope you find whoever you're looking for in Portland. Thank you, Maya said, shaking his hand and noting the calluses that spoke of someone who worked with his hands as well as his mind. I think I'm starting to understand exactly what I'm looking for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After David left, Maya remained at her table, staring at the coffee shop's exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood furniture. Everything here was like David's architecture projects, old foundations repurposed into something new and beautiful. Elena had done the same thing with Maya's life, taking the careful groundwork Maya had laid and building the kind of spontaneous, trusting relationship Maya had never allowed herself. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through Elena's Instagram. Again, seeing the photos differently now. In every image with David, Elena looked like someone who had learned to accept love without questioning whether she deserved it. She looked like someone who had taken Maya's financial stability and emotional walls and transformed them into a foundation for genuine intimacy. The cruelest part wasn't that Elena had stolen Maya's identity. It was that she'd used it to become the version of Maya that Maya had always been too afraid to be. Elena had taken Maya's careful planning and risk-averse nature and somehow alchemied them into the confidence required for love, for marriage, for the terrifying vulnerability of bringing a child into the world. Maya finished her coffee and gathered her things, knowing she had 20 minutes before her appointment with Detective Kim. 20 minutes before she would begin the process of destroying the life Elena had built using Maya's foundations. But as she walked toward her car, Maya couldn't shake the image of David's face when he talked about his fiancée. The uncomplicated joy, the protective tenderness, the absolute certainty that he'd found his person. Elena might have stolen that relationship, but the love itself was real. David's feelings were authentic, even if the woman he thought he was engaged to existed only in Elena's carefully constructed performance. Maya started her car and pulled into traffic, heading toward the police station where she would file the report that would unravel everything David believed about his future. But she carried with her the strange, painful knowledge that Elena hadn't just stolen Maya's identity. She'd used it to build the life Maya had always wanted, but never had the courage to reach for. The Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes unit occupied a cramped corner of the building's third floor, where fluorescent lights hummed over a maze of gray cubicles. Maya arrived 15 minutes early for her appointment with Detective Sarah Kim, clutching a manila folder thick with printouts, bank statements, credit reports, Elena's Instagram posts, screenshots of the mortgage documents. Evidence of a life stolen and rebuilt under her own name. Detective Kim emerged from a glass-walled office at exactly 9 a.m., extending a firm handshake. She was younger than Maya had expected, perhaps early 40s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her navy blazer and sensible shoes suggested someone who had learned to navigate male-dominated spaces through competence rather than charm. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming in. I understand this involves family identity theft. Maya followed Detective Kim into a small conference room where manila folders and coffee-stained legal pads covered every surface. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in flowcharts and timelines. Other people's financial nightmares reduced to investigative diagrams. My sister has been using my identity for over 3 years, Maya began, her voice steadier than she felt. She's taken out a mortgage, opened credit cards, even gotten engaged under my name. Detective Kim opened a fresh legal pad and uncapped a pen. Let's start with the basics. When did you last have contact with your sister? 3 years ago. We had an argument about money. Maya's hands tightened on her folder. She wanted me to loan her money for rehab. I refused. And you hadn't suspected any financial irregularities before yesterday? Maya shook her head, embarrassed by her own blindness. I check my credit report monthly, but somehow she managed to keep everything current until recently. The foreclosure notice was the first indication that anything was wrong. Detective Kim made careful notes, her pen scratching against the paper. Family identity theft is often the most sophisticated because the perpetrator has access to personal information that would be difficult for strangers to obtain. Childhood addresses, pet names, mother's maiden name, all the security questions that protect our financial lives. She knows everything about me. Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. We shared a room until she was 16. She knows my social security number, my mother's maiden name, even my first pet's name. What about access to physical documents, birth certificate, passport, tax returns? Maya thought about the last time Elena had visited her apartment. Almost 4 years ago, during one of their father's gambling relapses when Elena had stayed on Maya's couch for 3 weeks. Elena would have had access to Maya's desk, her filing cabinet, every piece of identifying information a person needed to become someone else. She stayed with me for several weeks about 4 years ago. She could have photographed or copied anything. Detective Kim leaned back in her chair, studying Maya with the kind of professional assessment that made Maya feel exposed. Tell me about your family dynamics. What led to your estrangement? The question Maya had been dreading. How could she explain the complexity of loving someone whose very existence threatened your carefully constructed stability? How could she make Detective Kim understand that saying no to Elena 3 years ago had felt like self-preservation rather than cruelty? Our father is a gambling addict. He destroyed our family's finances when we were young, lost our house, ran up enormous debts. Our mother left when Elena was 12. Maya's words came out clipped, clinical. I spent my 20s cleaning up the financial mess, rebuilding my credit, learning to live without debt. Elena took a different path. What kind of different path? Art school dropout. Struggled with depression, some substance abuse issues. Lost jobs frequently. She'd ask for money, and I'd give it to her. But it never seemed to help. She'd always need more. Maya stared at her hands. 3 years ago, she said she wanted to get clean. Asked me to pay for an expensive rehabilitation program. $30,000. And you refused. I refused. The words tasted like ash. I told her I couldn't keep enabling her, that she needed to take responsibility for her own recovery. We fought. She said I'd never understood what it was like to be the broken sister, that I'd gotten all the stability and left her with all the damage. Detective Kim set down her pen. How did that make you feel? Like she was probably right. Maya's confession surprised her with its honesty. I was 16 when our mother left. Elena was 12. I dealt with the trauma by becoming hyper-responsible, obsessively organized, determined never to be financially vulnerable again. Elena spiraled. I told myself I was helping her by refusing to enable her addiction, but maybe I was just protecting myself. Financial trauma often creates these kinds of survival mechanisms, Detective Kim said gently. Some children become controlling about money, others become reckless with it. Neither response is inherently wrong, but they can create conflict between siblings. Maya looked up, surprised by the understanding in Detective Kim's voice. You've seen this before? Family financial. Crimes are my specialty. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell you that money is never really about money in families. It's about love, control, self-worth, all the complicated ways we try to heal from childhood wounds. Detective Kim pulled a thick file from the stack on her desk. Your sister's case is particularly sophisticated. Most family identity theft is opportunistic. Someone grabs a credit card or takes out a small loan. This is different. Detective Kim spread photographs across the table. Printouts of Elena's social media accounts, copies of credit applications, employment verification forms. She didn't just steal your identity, Ms. Chen. She became you. Look at this employment history. She's been working as a financial analyst at Morrison & Associates for 18 months, using your credentials and experience. Maya stared at the documents. David's firm. She's been working for her fiancé. You know about the engagement? I met him this morning. David Morrison. He has no idea that the woman he's engaged to isn't really Maya Chen. Maya's voice cracked slightly. He thinks she's me. He told me about their relationship, about how much he loves her, about their spring wedding plans. Detective Kim's expression softened. That must have been incredibly difficult. The worst part is that he really loves her. Not the criminal who stole my identity, but the person she's pretending to be. The version of me that she's created. Maya wiped at her eyes, angry at herself for crying. She's pregnant, Detective Kim. They're having a baby. I know. We've been monitoring the situation since your initial call yesterday. Detective Kim pulled out another folder. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you some difficult questions about how you want to proceed. Identity theft cases involving family members are legally complex and emotionally devastating for everyone involved. What do you mean? If we pursue full prosecution, your sister could face federal charges for mail fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. With the amounts involved, over $500,000 in fraudulent credit and the mortgage, she's looking at potentially 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. 10 to 15 years? The pregnancy would likely delay sentencing, but it wouldn't affect the charges. A conviction would mean that child would grow up with his or her mother in federal prison. Detective Kim's voice remained professional, but Maya caught the subtle emphasis on child. Additionally, Mr. Morrison would lose his home. The mortgage was fraudulently obtained, so the bank would foreclose regardless of his good faith belief in the marriage. The room seemed to contract around Maya. She'd been focused on reclaiming her identity, on stopping Elena's deception, but she hadn't fully considered the collateral damage. David would lose his home, his fiancée, his future family. Elena's child would lose his or her mother. Even Mrs. Rodriguez and the other neighbors, who'd grown to care about Elena, would be devastated. What are my alternatives? Civil resolution. We could work with the banks and credit agencies to transfer the debts back to your sister's name, establish payment plans, potentially avoid criminal charges if full restitution is made. Detective Kim paused. But that would require your sister's cooperation, and it would mean the marriage to Mr. Morrison would have to be dissolved. You can't be legally married to someone using a false identity. Maya stared at the photographs spread across the table. Elena laughing with David. Elena's hand on her growing belly. Elena surrounded by friends and colleagues who believed they knew Maya Chen. There's something else you should know, Detective, Kim continued. Your sister's therapist contacted us yesterday. Dr. Jennifer Walsh. She'd been treating your sister under your insurance for 18 months and became suspicious when you called the insurance company. She can't violate patient confidentiality, but she wanted us to know that your sister has been dealing with severe depression and trauma. Dr. Walsh is concerned about your sister's mental state if this situation becomes public. Maya felt like she was drowning in the complexity of Elena's crime. Every thread she pulled revealed new complications, new innocent victims who would be hurt when Elena's carefully constructed life unraveled. I need time to think, Maya said finally. Of course. But Ms. Chen, there's one more thing you should consider. Detective Kim leaned forward, her expression serious. Your sister didn't just steal your identity. She's been living as you for 3 years. She's built relationships, professional connections, community ties. Even if we resolve this quietly, you'll be reclaiming an identity that she's been actively developing. Your credit history, your social media presence, your professional reputation, they're all entangled with her choices now. Maya hadn't considered that aspect. Elena hadn't just stolen Maya's past, she'd been creating Maya's present and future. Recovering her identity would mean inheriting the life Elena had built with it. What would you do? Maya asked quietly, if it were your sister? Detective Kim was quiet for a long moment. I have a daughter, 17, struggling with some of the same issues your sister faced. Depression, risky choices, the feeling that she'll never measure up to her older siblings. She gathered the photographs into a neat stack. I'd want justice, but I'd also want healing. Sometimes those two things are compatible, and sometimes they're not. Maya left the police station with more questions than answers, carrying Detective Kim's business card and a promise to call within 48 hours with her decision. The morning that had begun with righteous anger about Elena's betrayal had evolved into something more complex. A recognition that justice might require destroying not just Elena's stolen life, but David's real one, and condemning an unborn child to grow up with an incarcerated mother. As Maya walked to her car, she realized that Elena's greatest theft wasn't her identity or her credit score. It was the theft of moral clarity, the theft of simple victim and perpetrator roles. Elena had stolen Maya's life and used it to build something beautiful and real and devastatingly fragile, and now Maya had to decide whether reclaiming her identity was worth destroying everything Elena had created with it. Maya sat in her car outside Dr. Jennifer Walsh's office for 20 minutes, before working up the courage to go inside. The building was a converted Victorian house in the Hawthorne district, painted sage green with white trim and surrounded by carefully tended gardens. A small brass plaque by the front door read, "Jennifer Walsh, LCSW, Individual and Family Therapy." Maya had called that morning, claiming confusion about appointments she couldn't remember making, and Dr. Walsh had agreed to see her during her lunch break. The waiting room was designed to feel more like someone's living room than a medical office. Overstuffed chairs in warm earth tones surrounded a coffee table stacked with magazines and books on mindfulness and healing. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the walls were covered with abstract paintings in soothing blues and greens. Maya wondered if Elena had helped choose any of these decorative touches during her 18 months of stolen therapy sessions. Maya? A woman in her 50s emerged from an inner office, extending her hand with a warm smile. Dr. Walsh had silver-streaked brown hair and wore a flowing cardigan over dark jeans. Her handshake was firm, her eyes kind but professionally observant. "I'm Jennifer. Please, come in." Dr. Walsh's office continued the living room aesthetic with two comfortable chairs facing each other across a small table. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with psychology texts and self-help books. A box of tissues sat discreetly on the side table next to Maya's chair. A detail that made Maya's chest tighten as she imagined Elena sitting in the same spot, crying over traumas that belonged to both sisters. So, Dr. Walsh settled into her chair, holding a legal pad but not writing anything yet. "You mentioned on the phone that you're confused about some appointments. Can you tell me more about that?" Maya had rehearsed this conversation during her drive over. But now, facing Dr. Walsh's gentle attention, the words felt clumsy and deceptive. "I received some paperwork from my insurance company about therapy. Sessions I don't remember scheduling. I thought maybe there was some kind of mix-up with my account." Dr. Walsh's expression didn't change, but Maya caught something shift in her eyes, a professional wariness that suggested she was beginning to understand the real nature of this visit. "Insurance mix-ups can certainly be confusing," Dr. Walsh said carefully. "Can you tell me what kind of sessions the paperwork referenced?" "Individual therapy for anxiety and relationship issues." The claims showed regular weekly appointments for the past 18 months. Maya pulled out the insurance statements she'd printed that morning. "But I've never been in therapy before. I've never even been to this office." Dr. Walsh accepted the papers and reviewed them with the slow, deliberate attention of someone choosing her words very carefully. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that anything we discuss here is confidential. Have you been experiencing any memory issues lately? Gaps in time or activities you don't remember?" The question was so unexpected that Maya almost laughed. Dr. Walsh was trying to determine if she was having some kind of dissociative episode, if the Maya sitting in front of her was the same Maya who'd been coming to therapy for over a year. "Dr. Walsh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not having memory problems. I think someone else has been using my insurance to attend therapy sessions here." The careful professional mask slipped from Dr. Walsh's face, replaced by something that looked like relief mixed with concern. "You're saying someone has been impersonating you?" "My sister, Elena Chen. We look very similar, and she has access to my personal information." Maya leaned forward, studying Dr. Walsh's reaction. "I'm guessing that changes things significantly." Dr. Walsh set down the insurance papers and rubbed her temples. "Maya, and I'm assuming you are Maya, this puts me in an extremely difficult position. I can't discuss anything about my sessions with another person, even if that person was using your identity and insurance. Patient confidentiality is absolute, regardless of the circumstances." I understand. But Dr. Walsh, I'm not asking you to violate confidentiality. I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening to my family. Maya's voice carried the exhaustion of the past 2 days. My sister stole my identity, bought a house with my credit, got engaged using my name. She's pregnant and planning a wedding, and everyone involved thinks she's me. I'm trying to figure out how to handle this without destroying innocent people's lives. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with professional ethics and human compassion. I can't tell you anything specific about what my patient discussed in our sessions, but I can tell you that identity theft within families often stems from deep psychological trauma, particularly when it involves such complete identity replacement. What do you mean by complete identity replacement? Most identity theft is transactional. Someone uses another person's credit card or takes out a loan. But what you're describing sounds like someone who felt so fundamentally damaged by their own life that they believed they needed to become someone else entirely to survive. Dr. Walsh spoke carefully, each word chosen to convey information without violating confidentiality. That level of identity displacement usually indicates severe depression, trauma, and feelings of profound inadequacy. Maya thought about Elena's Instagram posts, the happiness in her face, the confidence she'd displayed in building relationships and a career. But she seems to be thriving as me. She looks happier than I've ever seen her. Sometimes people can function very well when they're essentially playing a role, especially if that role gives them access to stability and self-worth they couldn't achieve as themselves. Dr. Walsh's voice grew gentler. But that kind of psychological compartmentalization is incredibly fragile. The constant fear of discovery, the isolation of not being able to be authentic with anyone. It creates enormous stress. Are you saying she's been suffering this whole time? I'm saying that people who engage in this level of deception are usually in tremendous emotional pain, even when they appear to be successful on the surface. Dr. Walsh glanced at her notes, seeming to weigh how much she could reveal. Maya, can I ask about your family history? Without violating my patient's confidentiality, I can tell you that childhood trauma and family financial instability often contribute to this kind of identity crisis. Maya found herself talking about their father's gambling addiction, their mother's abandonment, the different ways she and Elena had coped with the chaos of their childhood. Dr. Walsh listened without taking notes, her expression growing more troubled as Maya described the family dynamics. You mentioned that you refused to help pay for your sister's rehabilitation 3 years ago, Dr. Walsh said when Maya finished. How did that decision feel at the time? Necessary. Painful, but necessary. Maya's voice grew defensive. I'd been enabling her for years, and it wasn't helping. I thought refusing to give her money would force her to take responsibility for her own recovery. And looking back now? Maya was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. I think I was also protecting myself. Elena's addiction, her chaos, it reminded me too much of our father. I was afraid that if I kept helping her, I'd get pulled back into the kind of financial instability that destroyed our family. So, you both were trying to protect yourselves from repeating your childhood trauma, but you chose opposite strategies. You became hyper-responsible with money, while she... Dr. Walsh paused, clearly choosing her words carefully, while she found other ways to cope with feelings of inadequacy and abandonment. You're saying this is my fault? Not at all. I'm saying that trauma creates complex family dynamics where everyone is trying to survive in the best way they know how. Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. Maya, what your sister did was wrong. It was illegal, and it violated your trust in the most fundamental way. But it wasn't motivated by malice or greed. It was motivated by desperation and a profound belief that she could never be worthy of love or stability as herself. Maya felt tears threatening and reached for the tissue box. Dr. Walsh, she's pregnant. The man she's engaged to, David, he really loves her. He thinks he's building a life with me, but he's actually falling in love with the version of me that Elena has created. If I report this to the police, she could go to prison. Their child would grow up without a mother. That's an enormous burden to carry, Dr. Walsh said softly. The choice between justice and compassion is never easy, especially when it involves family. What would you do? Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long time. I can't tell you what to do, Maya. But I can tell you that healing, for both you and your sister, requires truth. Not necessarily legal truth or public truth, but emotional truth between the two of you. You both need to understand how your childhood trauma shaped your choices, and you both need to find ways to move forward that honor your authentic selves. You mean I should talk to her directly? I think you need to decide whether you want revenge or resolution. Those are two very different paths, and they lead to very different outcomes. Dr. Walsh glanced at the clock on her desk. Maya, I'm going to say something that might sound inappropriate, but I think it needs to be said. Your sister has been coming to therapy for 18 months, working on anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. She's made significant progress in learning to accept love and support from others. But she's also been living with the constant fear that her entire life could collapse if anyone discovered the truth. Are you saying she wants to tell the truth? I'm saying that living a lie, even a successful lie, is exhausting and isolating. People can't heal while they're hiding fundamental truths about themselves. Dr. Walsh stood, indicating that their time was up. Maya, whatever you decide to do, I hope you'll consider whether there's a way forward that allows both you and your sister to live authentically. Not as perfect people, but as people who've survived trauma and are trying to build healthy lives. Maya left Dr. Walsh's office with a different understanding of Elena's crime. It wasn't just theft. It was a desperate attempt to escape from a version of herself that felt too damaged to deserve love or stability. Elena had stolen Maya's identity because she genuinely believed that being Elena Chen meant being broken, while being Maya Chen meant being worthy of the life she'd always wanted. The cruelest irony was that Elena had proven herself capable of building meaningful relationships, of succeeding professionally, of creating the kind of stable life Maya had always dreamed of. She'd just done it while pretending to be someone else. As Maya drove home, she realized that Dr. Walsh was right about one thing: healing required truth. But Maya was beginning to understand that the truth was more complicated than simple victim and perpetrator roles. Elena had committed a crime, but she'd also proven that the sisters weren't as different as Maya had always believed. Elena had used Maya's foundation to build the life Maya had been too afraid to pursue. But maybe, with enough courage and enough truth, they could both find ways to live authentically, as themselves, with all their shared wounds and unexpected strengths. The question was whether Maya was brave enough to choose healing over justice, and whether Elena was brave enough to trade her stolen stability for the terrifying vulnerability of being herself. Maya hadn't been to her father's apartment in over a year, but she still remembered the address. A modest complex in southeast Portland, where the rent was affordable and the neighbors minded their own business. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, before climbing the stairs to Unit 2B, steeling herself for a conversation she'd been avoiding since Detective Kim had mentioned Elena's contact with their father. Marcus Chen answered the door on the second knock, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that looked like guilt. He'd aged since Maya had last seen him. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face carried the gaunt look of someone who'd lost weight too quickly. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years, the hazy distance of active addiction replaced by the sharp focus of someone in recovery. Maya. His voice carried a mixture of joy and apprehension. I wasn't expecting— Come in, please. The apartment was small, but meticulously clean. A single bedroom with a kitchenette, furnished with items that looked like they'd come from thrift stores and garage sales. Everything was organized with the obsessive precision Maya recognized from her own habits. Books arranged by height, magazines stacked in perfect alignment, not a single dish in the sink. Recovery, Maya realized, had given their father the same need for control that trauma had given her. Dad. Maya accepted his awkward hug, noting how thin he'd become. You look good. Healthy. 2 years, 4 months, 16 days, Marcus said, settling into a worn recliner while Maya took the couch. I go to meetings every day. Sometimes twice a day when the urge gets strong. He gestured around the sparse apartment. It's not much, but it's mine. No debt, no risk, no way to hurt anyone else with my choices. Maya looked around the apartment, noting the Gamblers Anonymous meeting schedules pinned to a bulletin board, the recovery book stacked on the coffee table, the complete absence of anything that could be sold or pawned in a moment of weakness. Her father had built his own version of her careful, risk-averse life. Dad, I need to ask you about Elena. Marcus's face crumpled immediately, confirming Maya's suspicions. She made me promise not to tell you. Said it would ruin everything. If you knew. Knew what? That she's been sending me money, every month for the past 2 years. $500 to help with rent and groceries. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. I told her I couldn't accept it, that I didn't deserve help after everything I'd done to you girls. But she said she wanted to help, that she was finally in a position to take care of family. Maya's stomach dropped. $500 a month for 2 years. $12,000 that Elena had stolen from Maya's accounts to support their father. Dad, where did you think that money was coming from? She said she'd gotten a good job, that she was doing well financially. Marcus looked up at Maya with haunted eyes. I should have asked more questions, but I was so proud of her for getting her life together. And I needed the help. My disability payments barely cover the rent, and I can't work full-time because of the meetings and the counseling. What else did she tell you? Marcus stood and walked to a small desk in the corner, returning with a manila folder. She's been writing to me. Letters, mostly, but also pictures. She seems so happy, Maya. Happier than I'd ever seen her. Maya opened the folder to find a collection of printed emails and photographs. Elena's correspondence with their father, written under Maya's name, documenting 2 years of stolen life. Elena describing her engagement to David, sharing photos of the Elm Street house, talking about therapy and healing and building a future. In every message, she signed herself as Maya. Dad, this woman in the photos, you think this is Maya? Of course it's Maya. I know my own daughter. Marcus pulled out one of the recent photos. Elena and David at a restaurant. Elena's hand displaying the engagement ring. She looks just like you did at her age. Maybe a little softer around the edges, more relaxed. But that's what happiness does to a person. Maya stared at the photo, seeing herself and not seeing herself in Elena's face. Dad, this isn't me. What do you mean? The woman in these photos. The woman who's been sending you money. The woman who's engaged to David Morrison. That's Elena. She's been pretending to be me for 3 years. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's impossible. Elena's been missing for 3 years. You told me she disappeared after your fight, that you didn't know where she was. She disappeared into my identity. Maya pulled out her phone and showed Marcus Elena's Instagram account. Look at the metadata on these photos, Dad. Look at the timeline. Elena didn't get her life together. She stole mine. Marcus examined the photos with the careful attention of someone trying to process information that contradicted everything he'd believed. His hands began to shake as the implications became clear. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, what has she done? Dad, I need you to tell me everything. Every conversation, every letter, every detail about Elena's contact with you over the past 3 years. Marcus's confession poured out in broken fragments. Elena had first contacted him 6 months after her fight with Maya, calling to say she was getting help and didn't want him to worry. She'd been vague about details but insisted she was attending therapy and had found a good job. The money had started arriving a few months later, always exactly on time, always with a note signed Love Maya in handwriting that looked like Maya's but was slightly different in ways Marcus had attributed to emotional growth. She called me about the engagement, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Said she'd found a wonderful man who loved her for who she really was. I was so proud. Maya. I thought you'd finally learned to let someone close. Finally stopped being afraid of ending up like me. What do you mean, ending up like you? Marcus looked up at Maya with eyes full of shame. Broken. Unreliable. The kind of person who destroys the people they love most. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. You were 16 when your mother left. 16. And you took over managing the household finances because you couldn't trust me not to gamble away the grocery money. You became an adult overnight because I couldn't be one. Maya had never heard her father speak so directly about the impact of his addiction. During her childhood, his gambling had been the family secret that everyone knew, but no one discussed. Dad. Elena was 12 when your mother left. but she'd been watching me fail for years before that. Watching me promise to stop gambling and then disappear for days when I lost control. Watching me lie to your mother about where the money went. Marcus turned back to Maya, tears streaming down his face. You responded by becoming hyper-responsible, determined never to be vulnerable to anyone else's financial choices. Elena responded by giving up on herself entirely. What do you mean? She told me once that she figured she was going to be a disappointment anyway. So why try to be anything else? Said she was the broken sister and you were the successful one, and that's just how things were. Marcus sat back down heavily. Maya, I think Elena stole your identity because she genuinely believed she could never deserve a good life as herself. Maya thought about Dr. Walsh's words about identity replacement and profound feelings of inadequacy. Dad, did Elena ever mention feeling like she was living someone else's life? Like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't? Actually, yes. About 6 months ago, she called and sounded different. Anxious. She said she was worried about whether David would still love her if he really knew her, all her mistakes and problems. Marcus's voice grew quieter. I told her, that's what real love was, someone who knows all your flaws and chooses you anyway. She got very quiet, and then said she had to go. Did she mention being pregnant? Last week, she was excited but scared. Said she was worried about being a good mother, about whether she could break the cycle of family dysfunction. Marcus looked at Maya with growing horror. Maya, if she's been pretending to be you this whole time, what happens to David? What happens to the baby? Maya felt the weight of all the lives that would be destroyed when Elena's deception was exposed. I don't know, Dad. I honestly don't know. Is she going to prison? Maybe, probably, if I press charges. Maya pulled out Detective Kim's business card. The detective said she could face 10 to 15 years for the amount of fraud involved. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal. Maya, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I put this family through. But please don't let Elena go to prison because of money she stole to help me. I'll pay it back somehow. I'll get a job. I'll do whatever. Dad, this isn't about the money you received. This is about Elena stealing my entire identity and building a life with it. Maya's voice was gentler than she'd intended. But I understand what you're asking. She's sick, Maya. Not like I was sick with gambling, but sick in her soul. She's been broken since your mother left, and I never knew how to help her. I failed her just like I failed you. Marcus's voice cracked. If she goes to prison, especially while she's pregnant, I don't think she'll survive it. Not emotionally. Maya looked around her father's recovery apartment. Sparse, honest, built on the foundation of accepting responsibility for past mistakes while trying to build something better. Dad, what would you do? If you were me? Marcus was quiet for a long time. I'd want to find a way for everyone to heal. Elena needs to face consequences for what she's done, but she also needs help. Real help. Not punishment. He looked at Maya directly. And you need to decide whether you want to spend your energy on revenge or on building the life you actually want. What if those are the same thing? Are they? Marcus asked quietly. Maya, you've spent the last 15 years protecting yourself from other people's chaos. Elena's spent the last 3 years proving she could build the kind of stable life you always wanted. Maybe there's something you can both learn from each other. Maya left her father's apartment with a different understanding of Elena's motivation. Elena hadn't just stolen Maya's identity out of greed or malice. She'd stolen it because she genuinely believed that being Elena Chen meant being worthless, while being Maya Chen meant deserving love and stability. But Elena had also been sending money to their father, trying to heal the family wounds that had shaped both sisters' lives. She'd been working in therapy, building genuine relationships, proving that she was capable of the responsibility and care that Maya had always believed Elena lacked. As Maya drove through the Portland evening traffic, she realized that Elena's greatest crime wasn't identity theft. It was the theft of possibility. Elena had proven that the sisters weren't fundamentally different, that with the right foundation and support, Elena could build the kind of life Maya had always dreamed of. The question was whether Maya was brave enough to find a solution that honored both justice and healing, or whether she would choose the safe path of legal resolution that would destroy everyone involved while leaving the underlying family trauma untouched and unhealed. Maya sat in her car outside the Elm Street house for 20 minutes, watching David's silver sedan disappear around the corner as he headed to work. Through the kitchen window, she could see Elena moving through the morning routine that should have belonged to Maya. Brewing coffee in Maya's dream kitchen, wearing a maternity sweater that Maya might have chosen herself. Elena's movements were deliberate, careful in the way of someone protecting the life growing inside her. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. She was about to confront the sister who had stolen her identity, but Elena looked more like Maya than Maya ever had. Content, settled, living the domestic dream that Maya had been too guarded to pursue. Maya climbed the front porch steps, noting the carved pumpkins that Elena had arranged beside the door, the autumn wreath that matched Maya's Pinterest board aesthetic perfectly. Even Elena's seasonal decorating reflected Maya's secret preferences. The doorbell echoed through the house Maya had dreamed of owning, and Maya heard Elena's footsteps approaching. Elena opened the door wearing an oversized cardigan over leggings, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her hand instinctively protective over the small bump visible beneath her sweater. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Sister facing sister, original facing copy, reality confronting its own stolen reflection. Maya. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Elena? Or should I say Maya? Maya stepped forward. May I come in? We need to talk. Elena's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Fear, guilt, defiance, resignation, before settling into something that looked almost like relief. She stepped aside to let Maya enter, closing the door with the careful quiet of someone, trying not to disturb sleeping neighbors. The interior of the house was exactly as Maya had imagined it would be if she'd been brave enough to buy it herself. Warm hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves filled with a mixture of architecture books and novels, furniture that balanced comfort with style. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, Elena and David at various locations around Portland, Elena and David with friends at dinner parties, Elena and David's engagement photos. A life documented in images that should have belonged to Maya. The house is beautiful, Maya said, running her hand along the kitchen island she'd admired in online listings. Exactly like the photos on my Pinterest board. Elena flinched but didn't deny the accusation. How long have you known? 2 days, since I received the foreclosure notice. Maya pulled the legal document from her purse, setting it on the kitchen counter between them. Funny how that works. I found out someone had stolen my identity when they defaulted on my mortgage. I'm not defaulting. Elena's voice carried a hint of the defensive anger Maya remembered from their childhood fights. I missed 3 payments because David's firm had a cash flow problem, but we're catching up. I would never let you lose the house. My house, Elena. My credit. My name on the mortgage documents. Your house that you were too scared to buy. Your credit that you hoarded like some kind of security blanket. Elena's voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself, glancing toward the windows as if afraid the neighbors might hear. Maya, you've been saving for this exact house for 5 years. I know because I've seen your spreadsheets, your mortgage calculators, your Pinterest boards full of furniture arrangements for these specific rooms. But you never actually submitted an application because you were terrified of taking on debt. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. I was being responsible. I was making sure I could afford the payments. You were making sure you'd never be vulnerable again. Just like Dad was vulnerable to his gambling addiction. Elena moved to the other side of the kitchen island, putting physical distance between them. Maya, you had 812 credit score and $80,000 in savings. You could have bought this house 3 years ago, but you were too afraid. So, you decided to buy it for me? I decided to buy it as you. Elena's hand moved to her stomach again, a protective gesture that spoke of everything she had to lose. Maya, 3 years ago when we fought about the rehab money, you told me I needed to take responsibility for my own life. You were right. But I couldn't take responsibility for Elena's life because Elena's life was broken. Elena was broken. Maya stared at her sister, seeing her own features reflected in Elena's face, but recognizing none of her own certainty in Elena's expression. So you became me instead. I became the version of you that wasn't afraid to take risks. Elena's voice grew quieter, more vulnerable. The version that could accept love without questioning whether she deserved it. The version that could commit to a mortgage and a relationship and a future without constant anxiety about financial security. By stealing my identity and my money. By using the foundation you'd built to create the life you wanted, but were too scared to pursue. Elena leaned against the counter, exhaustion visible in every line of her body. Maya, I know what I did was wrong. I know it was illegal and hurtful and a complete violation of your trust, but look around. She gestured at the house, at the photos on the mantelpiece, at the evidence of the life she'd built. This is what your dreams look like when someone is brave enough to pursue them. Maya felt tears threatening, a mixture of anger and grief and something that might have been envy. Elena, you're pregnant, with David's child. He thinks he's engaged to me. He's engaged to the best version of you, the version that learned to accept therapy, to work through childhood trauma, to trust someone enough to plan a future together. Elena's voice cracked. Maya, David loves you, not me pretending to be you. He loves the person you could be if you weren't so afraid of ending up like Dad. He loves someone who doesn't exist. I exist. This life exists. This love exists. Elena moved around the counter, approaching Maya with the careful movements of someone trying not to spook a frightened animal. Maya, I've been going to therapy for 18 months. Real therapy. Working through our childhood trauma. Learning to manage depression and anxiety. I've been building genuine friendships, succeeding at work, creating the kind of stable community you always dreamed about. Using my name, my credit, my insurance. Using your foundation to become the person we both wished we could be. Elena reached out tentatively, stopping just short of touching Maya's arm. I didn't steal your life, Maya. I lived it, the life you were too afraid to build for yourself. Maya pulled away from Elena's almost touch. You stole my identity and committed fraud. David doesn't know who you really are. None of your friends know. Your entire life is built on lies. My life is built on possibility. Elena's voice carried a desperate edge. Maya, I'm 4 months pregnant. David and I are planning our wedding for next spring. We're talking about buying a bigger house, about the kind of family we want to build together. I've never been happier or more stable in my entire life. And what happens when he finds out the truth? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving protectively over her stomach. I don't know. I've been hoping I could find a way to tell him gradually, to help him understand that the person he fell in love with is real even if the name was borrowed. Elena, you can't marry someone under a false identity. It's not legal. It's not real. The love is real. Elena's voice broke completely. The person David knows, the person his friends and family love, the mother this baby is going to have, that person is real. She just happens to have been born with the wrong name. Maya looked around the kitchen again, noting the coffee mug, with "World's Best Dad" printed on it. The calendar on the refrigerator marked with doctor's appointments and dinner dates, the small sonogram photo held to the freezer with a magnet shaped like a house. Elena had built not just a life, but a family, and Maya's decision about prosecution would determine whether that family survived. Elena, I've spent the last 2 days talking to Detective Kim, to Dr. Walsh, to Dad. Everyone keeps asking me what I want to do, whether I want to press charges or find some other resolution. Maya leaned against the kitchen island, suddenly exhausted. But no one's asked the most important question, which is, whether you want to keep living as me, or whether you're ready to figure out how to be Elena Chen, the version of Elena who's capable of this life. Elena stared at Maya for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to be Elena and keep this life at the same time. Elena is broken. Elena is the family failure, the addict, the sister who disappointed everyone, including herself. Elena is also the person who's been supporting Dad for 2 years. Elena is the person who's been successful at work, who's built genuine friendships, who's learned to accept love and therapy, and the idea of being a mother. Maya's voice grew gentler. Elena, you've proven that you're capable of everything. I always believed I was the only one who could do. The question is whether you're brave enough to do it as yourself. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, they could see David's sedan in the driveway, David himself walking up the front steps with the easy confidence of someone coming home to the person he loved. "He's early," Elena whispered, panic flooding her voice. "He wasn't supposed to be home until tonight." Maya looked at her sister, pregnant, terrified, living a stolen life that had become more real than the original, and realized that the next few minutes would determine the future for everyone involved. David was about to walk into a conversation that would shatter his understanding of his entire relationship, and Maya had to decide whether to protect Elena's secret or expose it. The front door opened, and David's voice called out, "Maya, I'm home early. The client meeting got canceled, so I thought we could." His voice trailed off as he appeared in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene of two identical women facing each other across the kitchen island. For a moment, nobody moved. David looked from Maya to Elena and back again, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and growing horror as the implications became clear. "Maya?" His voice was uncertain, addressing both of them and neither of them. "What's going on?" Maya looked at Elena, seeing her own face reflected in her sister's terror, and realized that this was the moment when Elena's carefully constructed life would either survive or shatter completely. And Maya was the only person who could determine which it would be. Maya stood frozen in the kitchen as David's eyes moved between her and Elena, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. The silence stretched until Elena stepped forward, her hands still protective over her pregnant belly. "David." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what?" David set down his work bag slowly, his architect's mind clearly, trying to process the impossible geometry of finding two identical women in his kitchen. "Maya, who is this? Why does she look exactly like you?" Maya felt the weight of the moment. Every choice that had led to this confrontation. Every decision that would determine the future of Elena's stolen life. Before she could speak, Elena moved closer to David, her movements careful and deliberate. "David, this is my sister, my twin sister." Elena's voice carried the desperate creativity of someone improvising to save everything she'd built. "Maya, this is David. David, this is Maya." Maya stared at Elena in shock. Twin sister? They were 4 years apart, and Elena was trying to rewrite their basic family history in real time. David's eyes moved between them again, noting the identical features, the same bone structure, the way they moved with similar gestures. "Twins? Maya, you never mentioned having a twin sister." "We were separated as children," Elena continued, the lie building momentum. "Different foster families. We only reconnected recently." Maya realized that Elena was buying time, trying to create a narrative that would allow her to gradually reveal the truth without destroying everything at once. But Maya also realized that every additional lie would make the eventual revelation more devastating. "David," Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through Elena's improvisation. "We need to talk. All of us. But not here." Elena shot Maya a grateful look, recognizing that Maya was offering her a chance to control how the truth came out. David looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "Of course," David said slowly. "Maya, would you like to stay for dinner? I'd love to hear about how you and Maya reconnected." Before either sister could respond, a knock came at the front door. Through the window, Maya could see an elderly woman on the porch, holding a covered dish and peering through the glass, with the concerned expression of someone who had heard raised voices. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Elena murmured, color draining from her face. "She must have heard us arguing earlier." Elena moved to answer the door, and Maya followed, curious about the neighbor who had become such an important part of Elena's stolen life. Mrs. Rodriguez was exactly as Maya had imagined from Detective Kim's description, 70-something, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a lavender cardigan and carried herself with the posture of someone accustomed to looking after others. "Maya, dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said as Elena opened the door. "I brought you some of my chicken soup. You look tired this morning, and pregnant women need to keep their strength up." Her gaze moved past Elena to Maya standing in the hallway, and her expression shifted to confusion. "Oh my, I didn't realize you had company." "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is my sister," Elena said, using the same twin story she'd tried with David. "She's visiting from out of town." Mrs. Rodriguez's sharp eyes moved between the sisters, taking in every detail with the observational skills of a retired teacher. "Sister? Maya, dear, you never mentioned having a sister." "We've been estranged," Maya said carefully, not wanting to contradict Elena's story but also unwilling to build on the lie. "Well, come here and let me look at you both." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped into the house without invitation, the prerogative of someone who had become family rather than just a neighbor. She studied Maya and Elena with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Remarkable resemblance. You could be twins. David appeared in the hallway, still carrying the bewildered expression of someone whose world had shifted without warning. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how nice to see you." "David, dear, did you know Maya had a twin sister?" "I'm learning all sorts of new things today," David said, his voice carrying an edge that suggested his patience was wearing thin. Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to sense the tension in the room. "Is everything all right? I thought I heard raised voices earlier." "Just catching up," Elena said quickly. "You know how family conversations can get emotional." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, but her eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Maya, you seem different today. More tense than usual." Maya realized that Mrs. Rodriguez was speaking to her, mistaking her for Elena. The elderly woman had known Elena as Maya for 2 years, and Maya was failing to match Elena's usual demeanor. "I'm fine, Mrs. Rodriguez," Maya said, trying to modulate her voice to match Elena's gentler tone. "Just tired." Mrs. Rodriguez's gaze moved between the sisters again. "You know, I raised 4 children and taught elementary school for 35 years. I've seen my share of family dynamics." She paused, her attention focusing on Maya. "You're not Maya." The words fell into the hallway like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that reached every corner of the house. Elena made a small sound of distress. David's confusion deepened, and Maya felt the last of Elena's careful deception crumbling. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Elena started, but the elderly woman held up a hand. "No, dear. I may be old, but I'm not blind or stupid." Mrs. Rodriguez looked directly at Elena. "You've been living in this house for 2 years as Maya Chen. I've watched you grow from an anxious young woman into someone confident and happy. I've helped you with grocery shopping when your anxiety was bad. Listened to you worry about whether David really loved you, celebrated when you got pregnant." She turned to Maya. "And you, whoever you are not the woman I've come to care about like a daughter." Maya felt the weight of Mrs. Rodriguez's accusation and protection. Elena had built genuine relationships in this stolen life, had become someone that people loved and depended on. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Maya said quietly, "I'm the real Maya Chen. The woman you know as Maya is my sister Elena. She's been using my identity for 3 years." Mrs. Rodriguez's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, understanding, anger, and finally, fierce protectiveness. "I don't care what her name is," she said, moving to stand beside Elena. "The woman I know has been nothing but kind, helpful, and honest in every interaction we've had. She's helped me with my groceries when my arthritis was bad, fixed my computer when I couldn't figure out the internet, listened to me talk about my late husband when I was lonely." David was staring at Elena with an expression that might have been heartbreak. "Elena? Your name is Elena?" Elena's composure finally cracked completely. "David, I can explain. Everything I told you about my feelings, about loving you, about wanting to build a life together. All of that was true. The only thing that was false was my name." "The only thing?" David's voice carried a mixture of hurt and anger. "Elena, our entire relationship has been built on a lie. I don't even know who you really are." "You know exactly who I am," Elena said desperately. "I'm the woman who makes you coffee every morning, who listens to you talk about your architecture projects, who fell in love with your kindness and your dreams. I'm the woman carrying your child." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated complex family situations for decades. "David, I understand you're hurt and confused, but the woman you fell in love with is standing right here." She may have lied about her name, but she didn't lie about her heart. Maya watched this scene unfold. Elena's stolen life defending itself through the genuine relationships she'd built. David struggling with the revelation that his entire understanding of his fiancée was based on deception. Mrs. Rodriguez protecting the woman she'd known regardless of what name she used. Mrs. Rodriguez is right, Maya said quietly. Elena has been living a lie, but the person she became while living that lie is real. The question is whether that's enough. David looked at Maya with something that might have been gratitude for her honesty, then back at Elena with an expression of profound loss. Elena, I need time to process this. I need to understand how much of our relationship was real and how much was performance. David, please. Elena reached for him, but he stepped back. I'm going to stay at my brother's tonight. We'll talk tomorrow when I've had time to think. David looked at Maya. And I assume there are legal implications to all of this? Maya nodded. Elena has committed identity theft, fraud, and mortgage fraud. The consequences could be severe. Mrs. Rodriguez straightened to her full height, all 5 feet 2 inches of protective indignation. Then you'd better find a way to resolve this that doesn't destroy an innocent family. That baby Elena is carrying didn't choose any of this, and neither did David. As David gathered his things and left, Mrs. Rodriguez remained, standing guard, over Elena like a fierce grandmother protecting her young. Maya realized that Elena's deception had created real love, real community, real stakes that went far beyond financial fraud. The question was whether Maya was prepared to destroy all of that in the name of justice, or whether there was a way forward that honored both the truth and the genuine relationships Elena had built while living her stolen life. Looking at Mrs. Rodriguez's protective stance and Elena's pregnant vulnerability, Maya began to understand that justice and healing might require very different paths forward. Maya left Elena's house with Mrs. Rodriguez's fierce words echoing in her mind and drove aimlessly through Portland's evening traffic, trying to process the weight of choices that seemed to have no right answers. She found herself parked outside Pioneer Courthouse Square, watching commuters hurry toward Max stations and food trucks, everyone moving with the certainty of people who knew where they belonged and what came next. Her phone buzzed. Detective Kim. Ms. Chen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. Have you decided how you'd like to proceed with your sister's case? Maya stared at the square, where someone had set up a small stage for street musicians. A young woman with a guitar was singing about second chances and broken roads leading home. Detective Kim, can I ask you something? When you were dealing with your daughter's issues, how did you balance consequences with compassion? There was a pause. That's a complicated question. Why do you ask? I met with Elena today, and her fiancé, and their neighbor who's become like family to them. Maya's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 days having her understanding of justice systematically dismantled. Elena's pregnant, Detective Kim. 4 months. The man she's engaged to genuinely loves her, and she's built real relationships in the community. If I press charges, I don't just destroy Elena's life, I destroy innocent people who trusted her. Ms. Chen, I understand this is emotionally complex, but identity theft is a serious crime, regardless of the perpetrator's circumstances or the relationships they've built using stolen credentials. I know. But Detective Kim, what if the crime produced something genuinely good? What if Elena became a better person by living as me than she ever was as herself? Detective Kim was quiet for a moment. Maya, can I speak to you off the record? Yes. My daughter got arrested for shoplifting last year. Stupid teenage mistake, but it could have ruined her college prospects. The store owner had the choice to press charges or handle it through restorative justice. My daughter had to work at the store for free, write an apology letter, and attend counseling. She learned more from that experience than she would have from a criminal record. Maya felt something shift in her understanding. Are you suggesting there might be alternatives to prosecution? I'm suggesting that justice can take many forms. The question is what outcome you want to achieve. Do you want punishment, or do you want healing? After hanging up, Maya drove to her own apartment, the sparse, carefully organized space she'd built as protection against the chaos of her childhood. Everything here was controlled, safe, designed to prevent the kind of vulnerability that led to devastation. But looking around at her pristine surfaces and minimal furniture, Maya realized she'd built a life that was secure, but not particularly alive. Her phone rang. David Morrison. Maya? The real Maya? I got your number from Elena. Could we talk? They met at a coffee shop in the Alberta district, far enough from Elena's neighborhood to avoid running into Mrs. Rodriguez or other people who knew Elena as Maya. David looked like he hadn't slept, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his eyes carrying the hollow look of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been shattered. I keep thinking I should be angrier, David said after they'd ordered coffee. Elena lied to me about everything. Her name, her identity, her entire history. But when I try to work up righteous indignation, all I can think about is the woman I fell in love with. Maya studied David's face, noting the genuine confusion and pain. Tell me about her. About the Elena you know. That's just it. I don't know if the person I fell in love with was Elena or some performance of Maya. David ran his hands through his hair. When we first met, she was incredibly guarded. Wouldn't talk about her family. Couldn't commit to making plans more than a few days in advance. I thought she'd been hurt in previous relationships. What changed? Therapy. She started seeing Dr. Walsh about a year into our relationship, and it was like watching someone slowly learn to trust that good things could last. David's voice grew softer. She'd have panic attacks sometimes, usually triggered by anything that felt financially risky, but she was working through it, learning to believe she deserved stability and love. Maya felt a stab of recognition. Elena had been working through Maya's trauma, using Maya's insurance to heal from wounds they both carried. David, when Elena talked about her childhood, what did she tell you? Father with gambling addiction, mother who left when she was young, financial instability that created lasting anxiety about money and commitment. David looked at Maya directly. I'm guessing that's your story too. Our story. We both lived through the same trauma, but we dealt with it differently. I became obsessively responsible with money. Elena gave up on herself entirely. Maya stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns. David, the woman you fell in love with wasn't a performance. Elena used my identity to access the stability and therapy she needed to become the person she always could have been. But she lied to me about everything. She lied about her name and her credit history. She didn't lie about her feelings for you, her dreams for your future together, or her capacity to love and be loved. Maya leaned forward. David, Elena is pregnant with your child. Whatever else is complicated about this situation, that baby is real and innocent. David was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the people passing by on Alberta Street. Maya, what do you want to happen? You're the one whose identity was stolen. You're the one who gets to decide whether Elena faces prosecution. I want my sister to have a chance to be the person she became while she was pretending to be me. I want you to have the family you've been planning. I want that baby to grow up with both parents. Maya's voice grew stronger with each statement. But I also want Elena to face the consequences of her choices in a way that leads to growth, rather than destruction. What does that look like? Maya pulled out her phone and showed David the notes she'd been making during her drive. Elena confesses everything to you, to Dr. Walsh, to everyone in her life who matters. She legally changes her name to Maya, Elena Chen, creating a bridge between her stolen identity and her real self. She works with a financial counselor to systematically repay every dollar she borrowed using my credit. And she commits to continued therapy to make sure she never again believes she needs to steal someone else's life to deserve happiness. David studied Maya's proposal. And you don't press criminal charges? I press charges if she doesn't comply with every aspect of the restitution plan. This isn't forgiveness without accountability. It's accountability designed to heal, rather than destroy. What about your own dreams? The house, the life you wanted to build? Maya had been thinking about this since leaving Elena's house. David, I've spent the last 3 days discovering that Elena used my careful planning and financial stability to build exactly the life I always wanted, but was too afraid to pursue. The irony is that she proved we're not as different as I always believed. Meaning? meaning maybe it's time for me to learn from Elena's courage, while she learns from my responsibility. Maya smiled for the first time in days. Elena showed me that my dreams were achievable. I just needed to be brave enough to reach for them. Now she needs to learn that she can have those dreams under her own name. David was quiet for several minutes, processing Maya's proposal. And us? Elena and me? That's between you and Elena. But David, the woman you fell in love with exists. She just needs to learn to exist as herself rather than as someone else. You really think this could work? Maya thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's fierce protection, of Elena, about their father's pride in Elena's apparent success, about the genuine relationships Elena had built while living a stolen life. I think Elena deserves the chance to find out if she can be as brave about living as herself as she was about living as me. David nodded slowly. And if she can't? If she runs or fails to make restitution or can't handle the truth about who she really is? Then I press charges and let the legal system handle it. Maya's voice carried the steel that had helped her rebuild her life after their father's gambling destroyed it. But David, I think Elena surprised herself by building the life she did. I think she's stronger than either of us realized. They parted outside the coffee shop, David heading back to his brother's house to think, Maya driving toward Elena's house to present her proposal. As Maya walked up the front steps of her dream house, she realized that the next few minutes would determine whether Elena's crime could be transformed into everyone's healing, or whether the weight of deception would crush the genuine love and community Elena had managed to build. The porch light was on, and through the window Maya could see Elena sitting at the kitchen table, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, staring at something Maya couldn't see. Maya rang the doorbell, knowing that Elena's answer to the proposal would determine not just Elena's future, but the future of the child she carried and the man who loved the person she'd learned to become. 6 months later, Maya pulled into the driveway of 2847 Elm Street, noting the new addition under construction, a nursery extension that David and Elena were building together. The spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the tree they'd planted in the front yard 3 months ago, a symbolic gesture that had felt awkward at the time, but now seemed to represent something genuine about new growth taking root. She gathered the files from her passenger seat. Elena's latest restitution payment records, documentation of her sister's legal name change to Maya Elena Chen, and the final paperwork from Detective Kim's office officially closing the identity theft case without prosecution. Everything had been handled quietly, through civil resolution rather than criminal charges, exactly as Maya had proposed that night 6 months ago, when Elena had finally agreed to live as herself. The front door opened before Maya could knock. Elena appeared, visibly pregnant now at 7 months, wearing a flowing blue dress that complemented her growing belly. Her hair was shorter than it had been during her years of impersonation, styled in a way that was distinctly Elena rather than an attempt to replicate Maya's appearance. Most noticeably, she'd traded Maya's wire-rimmed glasses for contact lenses, a small but significant step toward establishing her own visual identity. Maya, Elena smiled, though tension still flickered around her eyes. Come in. David's just finishing up a call with the contractor. The house had evolved since Maya's last visit. The furniture remained the same, but Elena had added personal touches that reflected her own personality rather than Maya's Pinterest boards. Canvases lined one wall of the living room. Elena's artwork, landscapes and portraits that showed genuine talent developed through the art classes she'd resumed after the confrontation. The mantelpiece still held photos of Elena and David, but now they were clearly labeled with Elena's real name, a small act of honesty that had required enormous courage. "How are you feeling?" Maya asked, settling onto the couch where she'd first seen Elena and David together through the window. Tired, excited, terrified. Elena's hand moved to her belly with the unconscious protectiveness Maya had observed months ago. The baby's been active lately. David thinks he's going to be a soccer player. He? We found out last week. David cried when the technician told us. Elena's face lit up with uncomplicated joy. We're naming him Marcus after Dad. David suggested it. Said he wanted the baby to have a connection to our family history, even the complicated parts. Maya felt her throat tighten. Their father had been in recovery for over 2.5 years now, working at a financial literacy nonprofit and attending weekly meetings with Elena and Maya. The family dinners that had seemed impossible 6 months ago were now a monthly tradition. Careful gatherings where they practiced being honest with each other about their shared wounds and individual healing. How's Dad handling the excitement? He's building a crib, found the plans online and insisted on doing it himself, even though David offered to hire someone. Elena laughed, the sound carrying none of the desperate edge Maya remembered from their childhood. It's not perfect, the measurements are slightly off and the finish is uneven. But Dad says imperfect things made with love are more valuable than perfect things bought with money. David appeared in the doorway, looking more relaxed than he had during those first difficult months after the truth came out. He'd lost weight initially, stress and confusion affecting his appetite, but had gradually regained his equilibrium as he and Elena worked through the implications of her deception in couples therapy. Maya, good to see you. David's greeting was warm but still carried traces of the awkwardness that might never fully disappear. I was just talking to the contractor about the nursery timeline. Should be finished 2 weeks before the due date. They moved to the kitchen, where Elena served coffee and the homemade cookies that had become her specialty. Maya noted the subtle changes in the space. A corkboard covered with Elena's art class schedules and therapy appointments. A bookshelf that now included Elena's psychology texts alongside David's architecture books. Small signs that Elena was building an authentic life rather than performing Maya's dreams. The restitution payments are on track, Maya said, pulling out the financial documents. Elena, you've paid back 43,000 of the 78,000 total. At this rate, you'll be current within 18 months. Elena accepted, the papers with the careful attention she'd learned to pay to financial matters. Maya, I know this doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that every payment represents work I'm doing as myself. The consulting job, the freelance graphic design, even the art sales. It's all under my real name, using skills I developed rather than credentials I borrowed. Maya nodded, recognizing the significance of Elena's transformation. The sister, who had once believed she was too broken to deserve stability, was now supporting herself through work she found meaningful, paying back debts she'd incurred through deception, and building a family based on honesty rather than lies. Speaking of which, Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. I brought something for the baby. Elena unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a handmade photo album. The first page showed a picture of Maya and Elena as children, arms around each other's shoulders, before their family's troubles had driven them into different survival strategies. Subsequent pages documented their recent family dinners, Elena's art shows, Maya's new relationship with Tom Bradley, the loan officer who had become an unlikely friend, and eventually something more. Maya, this is beautiful. Elena's voice carried wonder. When did you put this together? I've been working on it since Christmas. I thought Marcus should have a record of his family history, the complicated parts and the healing parts. Maya turned to a page near the end, showing Elena and David at their small courthouse wedding 2 months ago, surrounded by Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus, Maya, and Tom. Elena, you've built something real, not the stolen version you created 3 years ago, but something authentic and lasting. David leaned over Elena's shoulder to look at the photos. Maya, there's something we want to ask you. We've been discussing it with Dr. Walsh and our couples therapist. What is it? Elena looked up from the album, her expression vulnerable, but determined. We want you to be Marcus's godmother. Not because of guilt or obligation, but because you're family, and because the person I became during therapy, the person David fell in love with, exists partly because of the foundation you built. Maya felt tears threatening. 6 months ago, she'd been prepared to send Elena to federal prison. Now Elena was asking her to help raise the child conceived during Elena's years of deception. A child who would grow up knowing the truth about his mother's past, but surrounded by love and honesty. Elena, are you sure? Being a godmother is a serious commitment. I'm sure. Maya, you gave me something more valuable than your identity or your credit score. You gave me the chance to become the person I always could have been but never believed I deserved to be. Elena's hand found David's, their fingers intertwining with the ease of a couple who had worked through crisis together. I want Marcus to know his Aunt Maya, the woman who chose healing over revenge. David nodded his agreement. Maya, Elena told me about your conversation 6 months ago, when you gave her the choice between accountability and destruction. I didn't understand it then. I was too hurt and confused. But watching Elena take responsibility for her choices while still protecting our family, I realized you saved all of us. Maya looked around the kitchen where she'd first seen Elena, living her stolen dreams, now transformed into a space where Elena lived her own authentic life. I'd be honored to be Marcus's godmother. They spent the afternoon reviewing Elena's progress reports from therapy, discussing her plans for returning to school to finish her art degree, and looking at David's architectural drawings for the nursery. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by with dinner, a tradition she'd maintained throughout Elena's pregnancy, and stayed to share stories about her own children's births and the importance of extended family support. As the evening wound down, Maya walked with Elena into the backyard, where the cherry tree they'd planted together was blooming. The tree had been Maya's idea, suggested during one of their early family therapy sessions, as a way to symbolize new growth rooted in truth rather than deception. Elena, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months? Of course. When you first stole my identity, did you plan for it to become so complete? The engagement? The pregnancy? The entire life you built? Elena was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Honestly, at first I just wanted to access therapy and maybe get a decent job. I was so broken after our fight, so convinced that Elena Chen was fundamentally flawed. She touched the bark of the cherry tree, still young, but growing strong. But once I started therapy, once I began working through our childhood trauma and learning to accept that I deserved stability, the life just grew. Like this tree. And David? David was the first person who ever loved me for who I was, even though he thought I was you. Elena's voice grew soft with memory. Maya. Falling in love with David taught me that I was capable of being loved. But staying in love with him, and him with me, required learning to be honest about who I really was. Maya understood. Elena's crime had begun as desperation, but had evolved into something more complex. A journey toward healing that had required both deception and eventual truth-telling. Elena, do you ever regret it? The 3 years you lived as me? I regret the lying. I regret the violation of your trust. I regret putting David and everyone else through the pain of discovering the truth. Elena paused, her hand moving to her belly. But I don't regret becoming the person I needed to be to deserve this life. And I don't regret proving to both of us that the Chen sisters aren't as different as we always believed. They stood together, under the blooming cherry tree as darkness settled over Portland, two sisters who had survived childhood trauma, family dysfunction, and the complex crime that had ultimately led to healing. Maya thought about her own life, the relationship with Tom that had begun as professional necessity, but had grown into genuine partnership, the new house she'd purchased using her own recovered credit, the therapy she'd started to work through, her own control issues and fear of vulnerability. Elena, there's something I want to tell you about Tom. The loan officer? Maya, We're engaged. Maya pulled out her left hand, showing Elena the simple gold band that Tom had chosen, practical but beautiful, like the man himself. He proposed last month. We're planning a small ceremony this fall. Elena threw her arms around Maya, the first spontaneous physical affection the sisters had shared since childhood. Maya, that's wonderful. Tom is perfect for you. Patient enough to deal with your spreadsheets, but strong enough to challenge your need to control everything. Maya laughed, recognizing the truth in Elena's assessment. We're planning to buy a house together. Not this house. I finally understand that this was never really my dream house. It was my safe house, my backup plan. Tom and I are looking for something that represents what we want to build together, not what I was afraid to lose. As they walked back toward the house, Maya reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. Elena's identity theft had been a crime, but it had also been a catalyst for healing that might never have occurred otherwise. Elena had learned to live authentically. David had learned about forgiveness and the complexity of love. Maya had learned about courage and the difference between safety and happiness. Maya. Elena stopped at the back door, her expression serious. I know I can never fully repay what I took from you. Not just the money, but the violation of trust, The years of anxiety you experienced thinking you were alone in the world while I was living a stolen version of your dreams. Elena, you don't need to repay me for becoming the person you always could have been. That's not debt. That's growth. Still, I want you to know that every day I live as Elena Chen. Every choice I make is myself, rather than as someone else. I think about the gift you gave me when you chose accountability over revenge. Maya looked at her sister, pregnant, authentic, surrounded by genuine love and preparing to raise a child in honesty rather than deception, and realized that Elena's transformation was the best possible outcome of the worst possible crime. Elena, we both know that families can be destroyed by money and addiction and the wounds we carry from childhood. But we also learned that families can be healed by truth and forgiveness and the courage to become who we're meant to be. Inside the house, David was cleaning up the dinner dishes, humming quietly to himself. Mrs. Rodriguez had returned to her own home, but not before leaving explicit instructions about prenatal vitamins and proper rest. The nursery construction materials were neatly stacked in the hallway, waiting for tomorrow's work on the room where Marcus Chen would begin his life surrounded by truth and love. Maya gathered her things, preparing to return to her own life. The apartment she was gradually making more welcoming, the relationship she was learning to trust, the future she was finally brave enough to pursue. But before leaving, she stopped in the living room to look at Elena's artwork, landscapes that captured the beauty of the Pacific Northwest, with the skill of someone who had learned to see clearly. Elena painted that last month, David said, appearing beside Maya to look at a particularly striking piece. A view of Mount Hood from the Rose Garden, painted in the golden light of late afternoon. She says art is about showing people beauty they might have missed otherwise. Maya studied the painting, noting the way Elena had captured both the grandeur of the mountain and the intimate details of the garden in the foreground. She always had talent. Even as a child, she could see things differently than the rest of us. She told me that during her years of borrowing your identity, she stopped making art entirely, said she couldn't create anything authentic while living a lie. David's voice carried wonder. But now, it's like she's making up for lost time. She paints constantly. Our life together, the places we visit, even portraits of family members. Maya looked closer at the paintings, noticing one she hadn't seen before. A portrait of Maya herself, painted with loving attention to detail but clearly showing Maya as herself rather than as Elena's reflection. In the painting, Maya looked confident but not guarded, successful but not isolated, someone who had learned to balance security with openness. When did she paint this? Last week. She said she wanted to capture how you look now. Not the scared, controlled person you were when this all started, but the person you've become while helping our family heal. Maya stared at her painted self, recognizing the truth in Elena's artistic vision. She did look different now, more relaxed, more open to possibility, less afraid of the vulnerability that came with genuine connection. As Maya finally prepared to leave, Elena walked her to the door, moving with the careful grace of someone 7 months pregnant. Maya, one more thing. Dr. Walsh suggested we might benefit from occasional joint therapy sessions, not to revisit the past, but to continue healing our relationship as sisters rather than as victim and perpetrator. I'd like that, Maya said, meaning it completely. They hugged goodbye, carefully, because of Elena's pregnancy, but with genuine warmth. As Maya drove away from Elm Street, she looked in her rearview mirror to see Elena standing in the doorway of the house Maya had once dreamed of owning, now transformed into something better. A home where Elena was learning to live as herself. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Tom. How was dinner with Elena and David? Still on for house hunting this weekend? Maya typed back. Dinner was perfect. Yes to house hunting. I'm ready to build something new. As she drove through Portland's evening traffic, Maya reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed Elena's crime into everyone's healing. Elena had stolen Maya's identity, but had used it to become the person she'd always been capable of being. Maya had chosen forgiveness but had demanded accountability, creating space for growth rather than destruction. David had learned to love not just the woman he'd thought Elena was, but the woman she'd actually become. and their father had found in his daughter's reconciliation the proof that healing was possible even after devastating mistakes. 6 months ago, Maya had believed that justice required punishment, that healing meant eliminating risk, that love meant maintaining control. Now she understood that justice could take many forms, that healing required vulnerability, and that the deepest, love meant trusting others to become their best selves, rather than trying to control who they already were. The cherry tree they'd planted together would bloom every spring for decades to come, its roots growing deeper each year, its branches reaching toward light. Like their family, it would weather storms and seasonal changes, but it would endure because it was planted in truth and tended with care. Maya drove toward her own future, imperfect but authentic, uncertain but hopeful, carrying with her the knowledge that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from erasing the past, but from transforming it into the foundation for something better than anyone had dared to imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.